Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Hopefully you saw the last video where I analysed the plants that are left on the mounts. And some of them need work, basically. And I thought I'd start with, I know it might sound silly, but probably the easiest one, because this plant hasn't been on this tree fern slab very long. It's wired on, so it's going to come off incredibly easily. This has never been that successful. It grows mould. I've had to treat it with hydrogen peroxide. My mouth won't work. More coffee. Frequently. And this just hasn't worked. It could be something to do with my environment, temperature ranges, and all sorts of things could have contributed, but at the end of the day, this plant on this mount is failing. I've had this plant a very long time, and there have been times when it has been absolutely stunning. These are not one of those times. It's now struggling. So we've got to do something with it. The first thing to do is get it off gently so that we don't damage anything. There are some new growths here which we don't want to whack. I mean, some of the wires coming off very easily because it just goes across the top. There we go. Right, so I doubt if this is rooted onto the plaque. Well, it's held in place slightly, but not really. This hasn't rooted into this tree fern. Just hasn't rooted at all. So I'm going to class that as a miserable failure. Which is a shame. I mean, you know, you have to try these new things. And I'd never tried that before. It was a gift as well, you know, to try, which I did. And in theory, that should have been a suitable plant to grow on a tree fern slab, because it's a mound forming orchid. It grows low and forms like a mat, so it should have been ideal, but it wasn't. Now we've got to try and work out, see there's a little new growth here on a tiny piece. Just sort of work out, is it really worth trying to get it to grow? Well, that's not going to grow, that's for sure. That might. I mean, it has little stubbins of new roots at the base of that pseudo bulb, so it might grow. Over here we've got a piece that's got roots. These are new active roots. The rest of the plant isn't up to much. So we've got a little piece there that should grow. That's two. And here we've got tiny little growth there. The rest of the plant's a waste of time, so we'll take that off. As I say, I'm just trying to get some little pieces that have got roots that stand a chance. Now it's a tiny little new growth there. But it could be part of, you know, a regeneration for this particular plant. Probably not going to grow, but we'll try. Then here again there's a single new growth there on top of what is a reasonable pseudo bulb. So I'm not going to take too much off of this piece. Just going to take the back end off because these are not totally shriveled. So we'll see what that piece does. And then here's another good piece. Come back to there and see where we are. We've got a piece over this side with a shoot, and then a couple of pieces here. This piece is a very viable piece, it's got root tips and everything. New growth here, and this hasn't long grown. So this piece is growing. I'm going to keep that piece intact. I've got a single little piece here. Just keep that front end perhaps. See, I'm just going to put all these little pieces in a pot. You know, they'll either make it or they won't. Some will, some won't, I suspect. You know, that's a new growth with a new root, and it's lost its leaf. So it's failed already. So we won't bother with that bit then. That's a waste of time. And now we come on to here. We've got this piece here. That's a good piece. Yeah, we've got several new growths and some new roots. So that piece should be okay. Just going to take the back end off. And then what we've got left is a piece that should grow on. That bit should be okay. See, this was put together as lots of little pieces. Is this bit worth it? No sign of new roots anywhere. No. And this piece, take that back to there. I'll take that piece off there. And that leaves me a piece that should grow on. It's a nice new growth there with a new leaf. These are new growths over here. And we do have some, we haven't really got much in the way of roots. But it's a piece that's worth trying. So that's what we've got left. I didn't get my tray out because I knew I wasn't going to make that much mess because there's no soil involved, obviously no media. And I can just whip the hoover around here to clear this up, so that'll be. So, given the pieces we've now got, good piece, reasonable, not. So I'm not planting up pieces that are unlikely to make it. This is a reasonable piece, that isn't. So we'll take that bit off. That's a reasonable piece, and so is that, 2 growth points. So that's what we're going to plant up. So if I cluster these together, this is pot selection going on now. I'm going to cluster these together to see how big a pot we want. These are not deep rooters, this is a shallow requirement. So something like that. So that's a pot about 3 inches across, something like that. So there we go. I will get a pot and we'll sort out what media I'm going to use, and we'll get it potted up and see if it improves. The trouble is it's only just started growing properly and starting to fail as it was growing. So it's lost this growing season. You know, the days are getting shorter, literally, by the day. But anyway, we'll give it a chance. It stands a much better chance in something different than it did leaving it where it was effectively doomed to fail completely. So hopefully we've rescued enough of it to grow on and get a reasonable plant going again, which may one day go back on a mount, but not at the moment. Not at the moment. I'm going to put it in a pot where it gets a lot of extra moisture for longer periods. If I mount it now, it's going to do the wet-dry cycle, which as an adult plant is perfect. But when you're trying to generate root systems and get a plant going again, it needs to have that moisture around the base of the pseudobulbs all the time. It shouldn't dry out, and then you try and keep it growing, if you see what I mean. So that's what I'm going to try and attempt. I'll be back. Right, first job with recovery is root generation. Root generation works very well in moss. A deep, normal shaped flower pot, that amount of moss is totally wasted because the roots are going to generate from the top of the pot downwards, and this is a shallow rooting plant. So I'm going to try something different. I'm going to hydrate some moss. I will break it up a bit because it has actually quite large at the moment. You have to bear in mind, if this does go back on a mount, it will be next spring that happens, and if it goes back on a mount, it will be mounted in this New Zealand sphagnum moss, and that's what it will grow in. So my plan is to start it growing in the aforementioned sphagnum moss now, so that any new roots are already acclimatised to this media. So can you see where this is going yet? So I need to hydrate this. There's no point in trying to plant things in bone dry moss that's loose. Loosen the caboose, whatever a flipping caboose is. Oops, bit of grass. Right, and we'll get that starting to hydrate. This is just RO water. So we're starting off with just pure water basically. And then we will just gently ease that into the water so that it starts to soak. It does need a bit of help. If you leave it all fluffed up, it will eventually soak up, but you can get it going an awful lot quicker by just pressing this down. Now what I've done now is I've compacted that moss. Yeah? Well, we've still got some more. So on top of that compacted moss, what we're now going to have is some light fluffy moss. I'm going to need a bit more water, I think, as well. The thing is that it will carry on soaking up this water, and eventually it will start obviously evaporating as well. And what we're going to do is that we're going to put pieces of the plant on there and just put some moss loosely round the base where the roots are. Bearing in mind all this moss is connected, it's all touching, yeah? And because it's all touching, it will wick. So eventually all of this moss will become wet. It's not yet, there's still not enough water in there. As fast as I pour it in, it disappears. I want a puddle, basically, to start with. Right, next piece. Not a very good piece, but it's a piece nonetheless. I'm just going to make a little place for it to be, like that. Now, that doesn't need any placed on top, that's just the new root element of that has gone straight down in. Again, we've got new roots on this piece, so we need somewhere for them to be. So we make a little well, lay that piece on with those root tips, and then just cover it up. So the roots are now in wet moss. So there's a couple of bits annoying me because they're old roots and they're sticking out over the top of places where things could be planted, so I'm just getting them out of the way. Right, then we've got another piece here. This is quite a large piece that looks like it's got two growing points. So I work better that way round. So we need somewhere for this to go. So we need a place there and a place there. just lay that piece in. Make sure these roots are inside. So I don't mind if this starts to grow over the side of the pot, as long as it's growing roots. The most important thing here is to get some roots growing. And that leaves the last piece there to go in there. And a bit more moss. The only thing I have tried planting stuff in these trays before, in moss I believe, and it didn't work. And I believe it didn't work because the tray, I made holes in the tray so that it didn't hold water. Well, isn't that a contradiction in terms? You know, you put it in moss because you want, you know, a nice moist base for your plant, and then make holes in the bottom of the tray for all the water to escape. Right. Now, it might not look very elegant, but I've got a feeling this is going to do the job. That dog needs oiling. It squeaks. Pathetic little thing. I had a dog made a noise like that once, had to put it down. Right, so that's it, that's what that's getting. That water's nearly all gone, but I will come back to it. I will come back. That moss needs to stay damp, not soggy, not absolutely soaking wet, damp. The dampness should induce the root growth. That's the theory. Because the person whose dog that is doesn't know it does that, because it only does that when she goes out. So if she pops up the shop, everybody else has to put up with that while she's gone. And of course then as she comes back round the corner, the dog thinks, oh, mummy's home, and stops doing it. So she doesn't even know that's going on, which is often the case, you know. Luckily, Mojo yowls in the house and not outside. Otherwise I'd be guilty of making annoying noises myself. So that's one done. That's Dendrobium jenkinsii, which is a mat forming orchid that has done very well on a mount in the past. It was allowed to go downhill, and I say allowed to go downhill because technically it was my fault, because the moss had gone off and I didn't get on and deal with it. So it started to go downhill, and as I had to do something with it anyway, I decided it was a suitable candidate to try on the tree fern slab, which in the case of this plant was a miserable failure. So that's it. No wrapping, no strapping, no wiring, no nothing. Just lay the pieces on some damp moss and get some roots going. And if that is successful, then these pieces will have roots, decent root systems. They can then be remounted next year at the start of the growing season. I'm not even thinking about trying to get this to bloom for at least a year. And as it blooms late spring, then, you know, it'll be a year and a half before we even think about letting this bloom. So there we go, that's one mount sorted. Still some more to go, but I'll keep them as separate videos so that we don't drag everything on too long. That's number one fixed, I hope. I'll update my notes accordingly, and see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.